Yes.
Okay, beautiful. So I want to start by naming the elephant in the room, and that is my accent. So in order for everybody to understand me for the next 1 hour, we are all going to practice our Australian accents. So it's very easy to do. There's one phrase you need, and that is "G'day, mate." So everybody repeat "G'day, mate."
Good day,
Good
mate.
day, mate.
Beautiful. So that is the only phrase you will need when you go to Australia. That is like saying "Cómo está, amigos and amigas." All right. So how to beat imposter syndrome and know your self-worth and be confident. That is the topic for today. Let's get started. Allow me to introduce myself and tell you why I'm passionate about this topic. I have been teaching for about a decade, and I've been mostly a high school teacher. I've taught a little bit in elementary, some college, and also teaching in adult education. And what I've learnt, the biggest thing in 10 years of teaching people of all ages, the biggest thing that stops people, that holds them back from success, is a lack of self-worth. And self-worth is also thought of self-esteem. And lots of people don't have the confidence, they don't believe in themselves. And many people suffer something called imposter syndrome, also known as imposter phenomenon. And I found that my students inspired me to start the School of Self-Worth so that I can spread a message or spread a wave of self-worth by teaching good people like yourself. And so that's just a little bit about me. Another thing that people don't know about me is that when I was a boy, little boy, I had an imaginary friend. And this imaginary friend came from outer space and landed in a box in my backyard, and we used to play together. So I learned from an early age that imagination, creativity, and playing and exploration were really important to me. So I'm going to help everybody to not only improve their self-worth and their confidence, but to tap into their imagination and to give them the courage to explore who they are so they can be successful in their life. There's 3 things you're going to be able to do by the end of this presentation. First of all, you're going to be able to describe what imposter syndrome feels like. And the second thing you're going to be able to do is analyze the cycle of imposter syndrome and upgrade to a cycle of confidence. And the third thing you're going to be able to do is apply a simple method to reframe imposter syndrome and use it to your benefit. So is everybody ready? Everybody's on mute. Just give me a yep, cool. All right. So I want you to remember this one big message today. If you remember one thing, remember this: know thyself, know thy worth. Know thyself, know thy worth. So this means that the more self-awareness you have, the more awareness of your value you have. Okay. So self-awareness leads to self-worth in all areas of your life, gives you more confidence, more happiness, and without a doubt, more business. So if you have more self-worth and more confidence, it's going to help you in your relationships. It's going to help you in your business. It's going to help you in social situations, definitely when you're networking in business. And it's going to help you with your purpose, your meaning, your spirituality, and going after what is really important for you rather than letting your fears and your doubts dictate your reality. You're going to let your self-worth dictate your reality. So I want to take you right back now about 2,000 years ago to ancient Greece, to the Temple of Apollo in the city of Delphi. And you can see here on my screen, this is the ruins of the Temple of Apollo. So you can imagine 2,000 years ago, this beautiful building was the center of a great city, the city of Delphi. And inside the Temple of Apollo was the Oracle of Delphi. And she was a powerful woman. She was a consultant to leaders, merchants, army generals of the time. And people came from all over the world to consult her, to get her information. And one of the things that was written above the Temple of Apollo entrance was know thyself. They thought that that was one of the most important pieces of wisdom to have on that building, and that was inscribed by the 7 sages of Greece. Know thyself. So we're going to be talking about knowing yourself as the key to self-worth. So let's get started. What does imposter syndrome feel like? I'm going to start with a quote from American poet and activist Maya Angelou, and she says, "I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find me out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out." And you can imagine if a woman has written 11 books that she would feel confident enough in herself. She would feel like she was, that she was self-assured. She had self-belief, but she admits even after 11 books, she still feels like a fraud, that people are going to find her out. And I think a lot of people can relate to this in their business, in their expertise, that they still feel like they don't know their stuff, even though they've been doing it for a long time. So imposter syndrome, here's a definition. Imposter syndrome is self-doubt concerning your abilities or accomplishments, accompanied by the fear of being exposed as a fraud, despite the evidence of one's ongoing success. And I'm wondering if the people in the audience right now have this feeling of self-doubt, like you might have lots of accolades, lots of success, accomplishments, intelligence, but you still feel like you don't really know your stuff, and that you are a day away from people finding out that you are faking, you are a phony, and that you will be exposed for your inadequacies. That is essentially the definition of imposter syndrome. I'll tell you what imposter syndrome is not. It is not an official diagnosis. It is not in the American Diagnostical Statistic Manual. It's not classified as a mental illness. It's considered a phenomenon. So here's the problem. The problem is that if you experience imposter syndrome, you feel like this little person in this little bubble here. Imposter syndrome makes us feel small. It makes us feel like a fraud, and it makes us feel trapped, like we're not achieving our full potential. And so you can see here this little person there. That's what we feel like when we are feeling like an imposter. So the solution is self-awareness. And self-awareness and self-worth are going to expand us, expand our bubble, and it's going to make us feel confident. Imposter syndrome is a mask. It's a mask that we wear. It hides our authentic self. And sometimes people will walk around with a brave face and pretend that they are happy. They will pretend that they are confident, but they are wearing a mask, and underneath they are feeling afraid of being themselves. And lots of people, they feel that they cannot be their authentic self, and so they wear this mask. So imposter syndrome is like a mask. I'm going to tell you my imposter syndrome story, and it's about the music we each have inside us. So many years ago, many years ago, when I was 9 years old, a musician came to our school and he gave a demonstration on how to use a keyboard synthesizer, a piano, and it made incredible sounds. And I fell in love with sound so much that I wanted to buy one of these pianos, but at 9 years old, you can't really afford these sorts of things. And so I started composing musical beats with my voice. And this is the musical art of beatbox or beatboxing. So I'm going to give you a 10-second demonstration right now of musical rhythms that I can make with my voice, just with my voice. So here is an example of 1990s hip hop beats. Ready? So that's all created with my voice. I'll give you another style of house music. So I learned this talent, this crazy talent to make musical beats with my voice. And I one day had this idea that I wanted to start a small business as an entertainer. but I procrastinated because I was afraid of what other people would say. I was afraid of stepping outside my comfort zone. I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't feel ready. I felt like a fraud. I felt that that people would find me out, that I was faking some part of myself. But I realized that I had this gift that I needed to share with the world, and that the value behind that was that other people could receive value and they could be inspired by something that I could do. And so I realized I have to endure the pain of feeling like a fraud for a greater cause, for a greater meaning. And so I found my value was education. And I realized I want to give that value to other people. And the turning point for me was to put myself to the side and focus on the people that I wanted to serve. So that has that's a big solution to overcoming imposter syndrome, is to think about the people that you want to serve and the value you want to give to them. All right, what are the causes of imposter syndrome? So I'm going to talk about the 3 levels of imposter syndrome right now. So you can see here, this is the iceberg of awareness. So first of all, we're going to talk about the known surface level causes of imposter syndrome. These are the things that we already know about imposter syndrome. So first of all, the first one is that it is a fear that we will be exposed for our inadequacies, usually something to do with our intelligence or our accomplishments. And it can also be caused by childhood things, such as if there are a lot of rules or anger or conflict in the family growing up. It can also be caused by perfectionism. I have suffered perfectionism a lot, and perfectionism, it gets a bad rap because it causes us to procrastinate and feel anxious. But I believe perfectionism is also a really great quality. There's nothing wrong with wanting something to be perfect, but the problem comes when we don't start a project, or we don't complete a project because we want it to be perfect, because if it's not perfect, what will people think of us? So that can be a cause of imposter syndrome. Another one is narcissism. So this is when you are selfish or self-importance. You think too much about yourself. And narcissism really means self-deception, that you are believing something that is not true about yourself. So they're the surface level causes of imposter syndrome. Let's look now at the unvoiced concerns and fears just under the surface. These are the things that you might not have voiced yourself, you might not have acknowledged them yet, but sometimes you think about these things when you wake up in the middle of the night. And so I'm going to say that the underlying cause of imposter syndrome is worrying about what other people will say and think about you. And it's also a fear of that people won't like you. You won't be accepted, respected, and you might be kicked out of a group. And so that could be an underlying cause of imposter syndrome. But now I want to talk to you about the unknown causes of imposter syndrome. This is the thing you're not aware of. And I believe this is going to start us to understand the solution to imposter syndrome. So the unknown cause of imposter syndrome is a perceived lack of self-worth in some area of your life, and a belief that you are not allowed to be yourself, a belief that you're not allowed to be your authentic self. Imposter syndrome, if we think of a metaphor, imposter syndrome is like a bucket with a hole in it. And you might think, what is he talking about now? So a lot of the time when we experience imposter syndrome, we go and look for approval and validation from other people, for self-esteem. And we collect that self-esteem, we put that into our bucket of confidence and self-identity. But the problem is we have a hole in our bucket of confidence. And so the self-esteem drips out. And no matter how much we look for approval and validation from other people, it's just going to continue to drip out the bottom. So imposter syndrome can be like a bucket with a hole in it. I want to talk to you about the story of Narcissus, which is where narcissist comes from. So this is a Greek mythology. A story is that there was a handsome young man named Narcissus. And one day a beautiful young woman approaches him in the forest and she says, Narcissus, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Let's get married. And Narcissus was very full of himself. He loved himself so much. He was not interested in romance. And he said to the young lady, go away. I'm not interested. Well, the goddess of love, Aphrodite, she heard about this and she thought to teach Narcissus a lesson. And so she cast a spell that as Narcissus was walking through the forest one day, he came across a pond and he saw his image reflected in the pond. And he fell in love with his own image and he could not break the spell and he died looking at his image in the pond. So the story brings up themes of self-deception, and imposter syndrome is really a kind of self-deception. We believe that we are an imposter. We believe that there is some inadequacy about us, even though there is evidence all around us that says we are successful and valuable. So the story of Narcissus, it's telling us to beware of our own self-deception. And I believe that imposter syndrome, if you reframe it positively, is a sign of a good imagination. We have the ability to believe something about ourselves that is not true, even though there is evidence against it. So I'm going to get into that in a moment to see how we can reframe imposter syndrome and the positives in the last section. All right, it is poll and breakout room time. The one question that we are going to ask, it's two questions. Magali, I hope you're getting the poll ready. The two questions are, how often do you feel like an imposter? And in what situations do you feel it? So most people have said regarding accomplishments and achievements, which if we study the research on imposter syndrome, we find that that is the number one thing that people feel like a fraud about, is their accomplishments and their achievements, also their intelligence. But we can see that's kind of replicated in this group as well. And it goes for men and women of all ages, regardless of where you are from. And about 70% of people experience it at some point in their life. Let's go on to the next section, which is how to break the cycle of imposter syndrome. So let's get started. I'm going to start with a quote from Oscar Wilde, who says, "The optimist sees the donut, the pessimist sees the whole." The optimist sees the donut, the pessimist sees the whole. And so likewise, a person with self-worth accepts themselves. They see their whole self, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they accept that. But a person with imposter syndrome, they exaggerate the negatives and they focus on them and they don't see that they have these incredible strengths. Okay, remember this one idea from this section. To break a cycle, you need to replace it with a better one. To break a cycle, to break a habit, you need to replace it with a better habit. And I say this because in physics, in science, there is a law called the cosmological constant. The cosmological constant. This means that there is never any more or any less energy in the universe. It's just the form that changes. For example, we have the sun in the sky. It's this ball of helium and hydrogen, and it is in its current form. Now, if the sun were to explode and go supernova, its form would change, but the energy is still the same amount. So therefore, I say you cannot just break the cycle of imposter syndrome, like stop it and then do nothing. You need to replace the form of the energy behind the first form of the cycle of imposter syndrome. It's like humans are naturally habitual, and that is an incredible power that we have, an incredible energy. So we have to redirect that energy into a different form, okay? So let's look at the problems of trying to break the cycle of imposter syndrome. Let's look at the surface level problems. And the first one is If you are trying to break the cycle of imposter syndrome, the big problem is you're too stuck in your own head and you are overthinking. There's a lot of self-doubt. You are going to have problems trying to solve a problem when you're in a stressful situation, when you're running around on the roller coaster in your mind. So that's what we know about trying to break a habit, is that it's too much routine and we're too used to doing it and we can't see a way out of it. But let's look just underneath the surface now at the unspoken levels of this problem. And you might wake up in the middle of the night thinking, is there something wrong with me? Am I broken in some ways? Am I going crazy? But I assure you, there is nothing wrong with you. You're not going crazy. The reason that you are having problems breaking the cycle of imposter syndrome is because you are out of alignment with your highest value. And this is going to hint to the solution of breaking the cycle of imposter syndrome, is to find your highest value. So let's talk about the imposter syndrome cycle. So first of all, we have the first part of it is self-doubt. This is the first part. We start to doubt our intelligence. We doubt our achievements. We doubt ourselves. We don't feel like we can be our authentic self, and that reduces our confidence. It usually happens when we go for a job interview. Maybe we are meeting with a client. Maybe we are asking for a promotion. There can be lots of reasons. It might be a new environment, networking, some social situation. Self-doubt just kicks in and we can feel like a fraud straight away. Next, we start overthinking and we start to try and solve the problem, but we are running around in our head so fast and we're trying to think of a solution, but we just keep on doubting ourselves and finding the negatives. Then we withdraw. We go inside ourselves. We don't ask for help. We procrastinate. We have feelings of giving up or staying small and not stepping outside our comfort zone. So that is the basis of the imposter syndrome cycle. Now I want to introduce, well, what that happens is once you go through that cycle, it equals unhappiness and it's unfulfilling. Now I want to talk to you about the cycle of confidence, which is what I want you to upgrade to. We're going to replace the cycle of imposter syndrome with a new cycle of confidence. And the first step is to define your value. This is really key. I want you to define the value that you give to other people. And I want you to define your highest value, the thing that is most important to you, the thing that you would love to fulfill in life, where you get your meaning. And I'm going to challenge everybody to get it down to one word. Mine is education. I orchestrate my entire life around that highest value, education. If I'm teaching or learning or there's an opportunity to educate people, I'm inspired and I'm like, yes, let's do it, because I know my number one value. Now, it's okay if you have 10 values, that's fine, but I challenge you to get it down to one, because that's going to be so empowering for you. It's going to help you to cut away of the distractions and focus on the one thing that you do best. So that's step number one of the cycle of confidence. Define your value. The second one is to validate yourself. So rather than going and asking for approval and validation from other people that it's okay for you to be yourself, that it's okay for you to be your authentic self, you can give yourself permission. You can give yourself the validation to go and be yourself. And you don't need anyone else to do that. It's nice to get some validation from other people. There's nothing wrong with that. Some encouragement, but don't rely on it for everything. I want you to know that you can generate your own self-worth and confidence by giving permission to yourself to be yourself. And then the last step of the cycle of confidence is to recall your inspiration. So remember, define your value, give yourself permission, and remember, recall why you are doing what you are doing. Okay, so imagine your vision. What inspires you the most? Why are you doing what you want to do? That feeling is going to create a courage in you so that you will endure pain and you will achieve whatever it is, no matter the challenges, the obstacles. Even if you go through imposter syndrome, it's like you will say to yourself, even though I feel like a fake and a fraud, I can't let that get in the way of me fulfilling my highest value and giving value to others. Does that make sense? Everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. All right, thank you. So if you can do the cycle of confidence, it's going to turn you into an American Ninja warrior, like this little woman there with the sword in the middle. So you're going to be confident. That's the cycle of confidence. And during the breakout room, you are going to go through an activity, or at least a discussion, where you complete those three things. And you can just write down, what's my highest value? What's a phrase or an affirmation I can say to approve of myself, to give myself permission? You might say, I give myself permission to be my authentic self. It could be as simple as that. I give myself permission to be confident. Then you're going to recall your inspiration. You're going to recall why you are doing what you're doing. And if you can do those three things, it creates a cycle of confidence, and it builds your confidence and your self-worth. So remember this, everybody, to break a cycle, you need to replace it with a better one. All right, let's go to a poll. Magali and the breakout, getting ready for that. So there's one question for the new poll, and the breakout is, which one of these ideas, which one of these tips that I've been talking about would be most useful for you when you start to feel like an imposter? So go ahead and complete the poll. Would you talk to a trusted friend? In fact, talking to a friend or someone who has experienced imposter syndrome is the best way to overcome imposter syndrome, because that way you're going to feel like you're not alone, and you're going to feel like you have been heard, and you'll get a second opinion of yourself, because a lot of imposter syndrome is second guessing yourself. So I want you to learn to trust your first guess and to believe in yourself. So go and share your story with someone, and you can practice mindfulness, affirmations, and the other options there.
All right.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay,
Ready.
Everybody, welcome back. Last section, how to use imposter syndrome to your benefit. And you might think, how is it possible to use this to your benefit? I'm going to show you how. So a quote from one of the psychologists of the world, Carl Jung, says, in all chaos, there is cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. And I mean this, I take from this that I think that imposter syndrome is a chaos inside a greater order of our authentic self. So I want you to remember one thing from this section. You can create something from nothing. You can create something from nothing. So this means that whereas imposter syndrome is a belief created in our minds despite evidence to the contrary, we can use this principle of creating something from nothing to create something else. We can create our authentic, confident self. We can create it from nothing just as much. And I believe that imposter syndrome is a sign of a good imagination. So we can create our authentic self from our imagination. Here's how you use it to your benefit. So I'm going to teach you a technique you can use on a piece of paper with a pencil, reframing imposter syndrome. You just draw 3 columns, A, B, C, and I'm going to go through them right now. So in the first column, this is where you identify the negatives of imposter syndrome. And this is the easy bit. This is where you might say things, well, I tell myself I feel like a fake and a phony. I feel like I'm never good enough. I feel like people are going to find out that I don't know what I'm talking about. So you write the negatives in column A. Then in column B, you would challenge the assumptions in column A. So whereas in column A you said, I feel like a fake and a phony, a challenge of that would be to say, well, I have a really good imagination. The fact that I can believe in something about myself that is not true, its positive reframe is I have a fantastic imagination. I can believe things that are not true. And I believe that if you can just change the direction of your imagination, you can believe other things that are not true but are positive about yourself. That's why I say you can create something from nothing. So the second or the third column is to restate the positives or restate the negatives into positives. So we've said in A, I feel like a fake and a phony. We challenge the assumptions. We say, well, that means I have a good imagination. And then restating that, you could say, well, who else could I imagine myself to be? So that's a reframe technique. It's like trying to see the positives in something, because I believe that we have an incredible imagination and we don't use it to our full extent, to the full power. If we can believe and imagine that we are a phony, why not just take a step back and think, well, who else could I imagine myself to be? And so I want you to imagine yourself to be your confident self, your authentic self, to be a person with great self-worth. So imposter syndrome, or using imposter syndrome to our benefit, is like an optical illusion. You know these books, the Magic Eye books, where you look at the picture, it's a 2D image and you can't see anything. That's imposter syndrome. It makes us see this 2D image of ourselves. But if you look through imposter syndrome, if you look through the illusion and the self-deception of imposter syndrome, you're going to see this 3D image of your authentic self pop out into you. So imposter syndrome is, or using it to our benefit, is like seeing through the optical illusions. So you can create something from nothing. And I think I've gone really quickly. Thank you, Hispanic Business Network. Before you leave tonight, there's one thing I want you to remember, and that is know thyself and know thy worth. And I know that was probably quicker than 5 minutes, Jorge, but that's the last section. I have a free gift for everybody. If you want to get this, if you want to get more information, it's called Crush Imposter Syndrome Forever, the starter kit for bulletproof confidence. It's a free online video course that I created, and you can get it at samosborn.com/starter kit. So thank you very much, Jorge and Magali and everyone from the Hispanic Business Network for letting me speak today.
Thank you, Sam. You have been there every time we call you, and every time we look for your advice and your knowledge. We're going to be sending this samosborn.com start kit by email to all the people that participate to today to get your gift.
I do have a question.
Taylor's.
So I don't know, based on obviously the introduction to the syndrome and the very little knowledge that I have, it seems to me that this could potentially be negative or positive in your life, depending on how you adapted it to yourself, right?
Yeah, I believe everything in life can be seen positively or negatively, but we have this ability to choose how we want to see something. So if you see something negative, what I recommend is that you list reasons of how imposter syndrome is serving you and helping you to achieve your highest value, and to the point that you can say, I'm glad I experienced imposter syndrome because it has taught me more about myself.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sam. Another questions? One more. We have time for one more. One more question.
I have a question.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
At the beginning of the presentation, Sam, I heard that this syndrome can happen to grown-ups and also to children, right? So what can we do as parents to help our kids with this syndrome? Any suggestions or activities or tips that you can share with us?
Yeah, there's a great book I read called The Path to Purpose by William Stanton. He's up at University of Stanton. Yeah, and he says the best thing parents can do is to have a conversation with their children about their purpose in life. What a great conversation to sit down with your children and talk about why you do what you do, And the second thing you can do is introduce your children to people who are living their purpose, people who are inspired, people who have overcome imposter syndrome. Okay, and by sharing the stories, that's going to inspire the child.